John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. Everyone from the governor to our two senators now are demanding answers as to why a forest fire destroyed the historic lodge and other structures, 70 others, on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Tonight, we are going to get some answers. Gabriel Mann is extremely well sourced on wildland fires, and he produced a magnificent documentary, Hotshot, after embedding 6.5 years with fire crews in California. Gabriel Mann joins me now on Newsmaker. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry about the circumstances, because I know you've been up there and you love that spot.
I do. I've been up there, and look, I identified it as potentially hazardous because there's, quite a bit of juniper around the lodge. But I'll be honest, I was a little flabbergasted when I found out that everything burned down, because it didn't seem like it should have. That was my initial reaction.
I think that's kind of the working consensus right now. Let's do a quick TikTok, Gabriel. It started with a lightning strike on the 4th of July. The decision was made to let it burn, treat it as a controlled burn. This is very important. You've been a huge advocate that you need fire, that if you don't burn it now, you're going to get a worse result later.
You're 100% correct. We have to use fire to manage the landscape. And Arizona actually has a really good history of doing this. And so they were sort of rightly confident that they could manage this fire. That's what it's called. It's called a managed fire. They didn't put the ignition on the ground, but they have it. So they're like, all right, well, if it's here, and there can be a resource benefit for this, and it can help clean up the forest of a lot of this overgrown fuels. And look, I've seen that forest. There's a lot of fuels that had to get cleaned up. So it was necessary. And ultimately, if we were to remove the structure loss here, it actually had the desired effect. It had a really good effect on the forest. However, clearly, there was not enough attention paid to the contingency in making sure that those structures didn't get impacted by this beneficial fire. And there's a variety of reasons for that.
Yeah, okay, so let's continue the TikTok here. 3 days later, after it started as a lightning strike, this is from the National Park Service. Dragon Bravo fire update North Rim. A lightning caused fire is burning an estimated 10 acres. It's being managed for resource objectives. Smoke is visible, no threats to infrastructure or public safety. Crews are monitoring. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay, but temperatures heat up and things are drying out. Everything seems fine until Thursday, okay? And we get the report that they were working, everything was working as planned until July 10th. This is 6 days after it started. Unfortunately, we had really strong aggressive winds come up from the canyon that changed the fire behavior dramatically and quickly. That's from the National Park Service. Okay, at that point, do you have trigger points with your crews to say, hey, listen, if this thing runs on us in the opposite direction, which it did, are we ready for that?
Yes, there's always going to be trigger points on any fire, whether it's prescribed fire, a managed fire, or an active wildfire that's out of control. So basically, what they're doing is they're planning several steps ahead. Okay, if it crosses this trail, this is what we're going to do. We're going to fall back to here. We're going to implement this dozer line, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always going to be trigger points. The question is, did they expand that box enough? Now, when it comes to managed fires like this is the problem. Look, there's a tremendous benefit to having this fire on the landscape, but unfortunately, what people who argue against this process will say is, okay, maybe on Monday and Tuesday, this is a good idea to have this managed fire. But we don't know what's going to happen Saturday and Sunday. What if you get a dry thunderstorm that pushes through and blows out the fire? Then what? And look, there's a solid argument to that. But the answer to that isn't, well, let's never do this beneficial managed fire. The answer to that is we need to adequately prepare a contingency line around the stuff that we don't want to burn, because things go sideways all the time. Prescribed fires can go sideways. And look, another lightning strike could have hit closer to the visitor center and been hit by that same weather. So where that ignition came from doesn't really matter. You have to act as if that ignition could come anytime. What it doesn't seem like happened was they didn't triage these structures and they didn't adequately prepare them. And it seems like there's a variety of reasons for that. Number one, this is true in Yosemite National Park as well. when there's fires in these areas that are very popular tourist destinations, they're very reticent to pull the alarm too soon. They don't want to cancel people's plans. People have been, booking out reservations at these places for a year in advance. They've spent a lot of money. Sometimes they're coming from foreign countries, and you're going to ruin their trip. And so naturally, they're a little reluctant to say, hey, we got to vacate everybody. We got to put sprinklers around all this stuff. We got to start cutting down trees around the lodge. They're not really eager to do that.
Yeah. And what about assets that were up there? You're well sourced. Were there enough assets up by the lodge to do structure protection if it went sideways?
Well, there is an active investigation, so I don't want to get out in front of my skis because, sometimes the information that comes from the ground can be a little bit fuzzy, and it'll be good to wait for that official investigation to play out. However, there were several things that were impacting whether or not resources could get to that area. There was a water treatment plant that got impacted by fire and was producing chlorine gas. This is a major life safety threat. And unfortunately, the way that chlorine gas works is it's heavier than the surrounding air, and so it sits on the ground, and it's basically this hazard that doesn't necessarily disperse. So firefighters were blocked by that. That was one of the issues. I do believe that another issue is that they did not expect this to reach the visitor center. And that's a problem. They probably should have had a deeper contingency. They probably should have pulled the trigger on getting people out of there and getting sprinklers set up around these structures. In fact, look, all of these structures are embedded in the wildlands. They're surrounded by trees. They should probably just have a permanent sprinkler system there. So it's already in place, and all they got to do is turn on a valve and start wetting down these structures. They should have all of the foil in place, because typically when fires move through areas like this, they'll wrap these structures in foil. That didn't happen.
Okay.
They're saying they just didn't have enough time.
Okay, let's go to Saturday. This is a critical day. 6 p.m. was the first time that the National Park Service posted on social media saying they are engaging the fire under a full fire suppression strategy. Firefighters have conducted containment lines and were prepared to conduct a defensive firing operation before conditions rapidly changed. They make it kind of seem like this is unforeseen, but you have to see it, right?
Yeah, look, I've seen things go sideways in unpredictable ways, but I think there's enough caution that can be taken. You have incident meteorologists who are giving you a heads up and giving you spot weather forecasts. Things do change rapidly, but this is why I always stress how the preparation has to be done well in advance. Like in the winter time, these structures should have been prepped for this way in advance. And this is typically where the failures occur, because there can be so many unforeseen things that pop up on the fire line. A tree falls across the road, and now the buggies can't get in there, right? Chlorine gas from a water treatment facility. Why wasn't that facility isolated from anything that could burn? That thing should be totally insulated from ever burning in a wildfire, so you don't get that happening. So these failures, it's a cascade of failures that start, well in advance of the fire. Yeah. They should have these systems in place to protect these structures, so that way they're not scrambling when the weather decides to throw them a curveball. You should have multiple layers of safety mechanisms that can prevent that, that
the first domino. Yeah.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So we're into Saturday, 6 p.m., and within hours we get this from the Park Service. We've lost buildings, but hundreds of lives were saved due to the fact that this fire was expertly handled. I mean, I have to actually laugh. That is the most preposterous release I've ever heard. It was expertly handled. This is an ultimate failure, I would say.
I think any time that you get structure loss, it is a failure. Now, again, I would set out the boundaries of where we begin identifying that failure, and I wouldn't just start it at July 4th. I think this is a failure across the board throughout fire country, all around the West, to not be adequately prepared for when this happens. Now, it reeks of a political statement.
Yes, it does. That's what rubbed me the wrong way.
Correct. And this is such a hallmark of the social media era. And look, I think that these agencies need to be a bit more forthright with the people who pay their salaries, because we deserve it. Like all of us federal taxpayers are paying for this service. Now, they do heroic work. The people who operate these apparatuses, they are absolutely experts. But there's a limitation on what we can control with wildland fire. And we have to understand this. And there has to be a dialogue with the public. But when you say it like that, it sounds like it's a, a cover my tushy kind of thing.
Yes.
And that rubs people the wrong way.
Okay, I got another one for you that I've got to get your reaction. There's a guy named Kurt Stanley who was directing airplanes and helicopters as the North Rim Grand Canyon Lodge was engulfed in flames. He said, we're just short on resources. Didn't have enough people, enough aircraft to get there and, effectively fight the fire. But this is the one that got me. Stanley said the crews were unable to use fire retardant on July 12th. That's when the lodge went up. The day the lodge burned due to orders from the National Park Service. Fire retardant, that's the stuff that comes out of the planes, leaves red stains caused by dye used to make it easier to identify areas where retardant has been dropped. The use of retardant is often avoided near historic buildings. Now, I mean, I'm just a layperson. Would you rather have your structure saved or have it looking nice?
This is going to be an eternal battle. Now, there are exclusion zones for retardant. It is an environmental hazard, okay? So typically these exclusion zones are around watershed areas. They don't want this stuff getting into a waterway because it can be destructive to aquatic life. So this is an issue. It has been restricted by the EPA. Its use has been restricted. However, the federal court ruled an exception that there is a life safety threat with wildfires. Therefore, we're gonna subjugate that environmental risk of retardant, and we're gonna allow its continued usage, even though it does violate the Clean Water Act. So we're in this interesting space with retardant where technically it's not allowed to be used, period. But there is an exception to using it. So you are gonna get tripped up with these kinds of scenarios. Now, if it's true that the reason was, hey, we didn't wanna stain these things, again, this is a problem you see over and over. This is a problem in the Palisades fire. They were supposed to replace power poles in the Palisades area. They never did it because when they started that work, they ran over a milk vetch plant. And of course, they had to stop that. We can't destroy these plants. Sure enough, a fire hits, everything gets destroyed.
Oh my God.
This is that constant bargain. It's like, well, are we going to sacrifice one tree or a few trees, or are we going to sacrifice the paint on a building to make sure that we don't lose them all? I think everybody would agree that we should probably.
Yeah. Gabriel, I've got to ask you this because a lot has been talked about of resources being cut by the Trump administration. You've talked to the crews, you know what's going on the ground. Is that a true statement?
Well, it's certainly true that the feds have lost a ton of their firefighting resources, but when it happened was actually in 2021. So it was a combination of the injection mandate and years of low pay. And the U.S. Forest Service does not even classify their firefighters as firefighters. They classify them as forestry technicians. And so they actually ended up losing 40% of their firefighting workforce back in 2021. Now, they've been working really hard to try to raise the pay, and it wasn't until Senator Sheehy got into office that they actually managed to get this done. But representatives in Arizona, including one of the current senators in Arizona, actually voted against raising firefighter pay over the last 2 years. And because of that, through attrition, the Forest Service lost a ton of employees. So that's
was
the real
that Mark
story.
Kelly or
Ruben Gallego.
Or Ruben Gallego? Okay, it was Ruben Gallego. Interesting. Okay, didn't know that. Finally, can we just? I mean, there's so much there to unpack, and you just went through it in the Palisades fire. That's when we had you on the program last. The division between the Park Service and the Forest Service. Who's calling the shots in a situation like what we had in the Grand Canyon? Up at the lodge.
That's a good question. Depending on where it started, whoever's dirt it started on is going to be what's called the UOP, the Unified Ordering Point. And they're going to be dictating how it goes. I believe this was on NPS dirt. So look, there is a lot of interagency coordination. So it's typically not an issue on these fires. I mean, these people are so accustomed to working together. That's typically not the problem. This is a really challenging scenario because ultimately this fire was good for the landscape. The structures just weren't properly triaged, and they did not expand their contingency zone far enough. And it's a hell of a way to learn their lesson. And unfortunately, this is going to sour the public on using fire for resource benefit, which ultimately is just going to put us back in a position where we're going to have more catastrophic fires. So clearly, there needs to be a dialogue here where they understand if we're going to do this, especially in the middle of July, which is it's a kind of risky time to be doing a managed fire. You got to properly prep these structures. You got to have the alacrity of pulling that fire alarm on getting those people out and prepping the structures, even if it inconveniences someone's trip, because guess what? Now everybody's trip is going to be canceled for the next year or two.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, Gabriel Mann, great to see you. And for people who want to see, and I highly recommend it, if you want a quick history on wildfire in the United States, it is called Hotshot. That's the film, Arizona Prime Video, Apple, Vudu, Google Play. You will not be sorry. It is I call it a masterpiece. I've never seen anything like it. Gabriel Mann, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you again. Thank you, Gabriel. When we come back on Newsmaker, national political columnist Charles Lipson on the first 6 months of the Trump administration. Next. Welcome back on Newsmaker. Donald Trump has been in office now for about 6 months, so I thought it would be a good time to check in with Charles Lipson, professor emeritus at University of Chicago, writes regularly for The Spectator magazine, Real Clear Politics, and others. He's also written a book about free speech on campus that we're going to talk about as well. Charles, great to see you.
Great to see you, John.
Okay, it's been about 6 months. The Democrats hate what's going on. Republicans generally like it, although Epstein's been a wrench in the gears. How would you grade the administration so far?
I would actually grade them as an A. And the reason, I think, is that they didn't just promise things, they're actually delivering on promises. And what's been striking is that they're delivering on promises even though they have extremely thin margins on Capitol Hill. I think that leads to a problem, not only of getting financial items through, which is the only thing you can get through given the Senate and its 60 vote filibuster rule, but also it means that you're getting a lot of executive orders, which of course can be overturned by a Democratic president, just as President Trump overturned orders given by Biden.
Let's talk about a couple of the victories from the Trump perspective. The big, beautiful bill. That's a big victory because I think above all, they were really worried about the tax cuts staying, the 2017, and then trimming it back even a little bit more.
Yes, they were worried both because they couldn't have delivered. If they didn't deliver, they would have been held accountable by the public. He's the President of the United States, and he would have been held responsible. The other thing I would say is that I'm really struck, John, by how many 80-20 cultural and social issues have been in the news. The biggest example being transgenders in girls' sports, and how Democrats have gotten on the wrong side of so many to their detriment politically.
You've written about that, and you've also written about immigration, that trying to deport a lot of people is going to be really, really difficult. And some of the public polling on this is interesting. Harvard-Harris, it came out Monday, 75% of respondents say they support the administration's efforts to deport criminals. That number, though, goes down when you start saying deporting people here illegally. 52% say the administration is doing the right thing, enforcing immigration policy. 48% say he's gone too far in the enforcement actions. There is a divide, isn't there, over criminal illegal aliens, using the Trump term, and people who have come here illegally but are doing pretty much everything the right way.
I think that's right. And I would say there's another category, that is people who've already been ruled on by the courts that they have to leave the country and still haven't. And I think that the public would support their being moved out. The other is that sanctuary cities and states are in effect requiring the federal government to end up taking in a lot of people who have not committed crimes other than coming into the country illegally. That's a crime in and of itself. They are not doing catch and release. If they go into your house, they may be going after John, but if Charles is with John, then and I'm here illegally, they're going to take me into custody and deport me.
And this can be incredibly disruptive in communities because, you know, after a while, these are people that are your neighbors, they're people you work with. This starts to change public opinion.
Yes, and it has some other impacts, some of which will favor the Trump administration, some of which will hurt it.
Let's talk about another, the Iran airstrikes. It's interesting how that was viewed before the strike and after. What's your take on that entire operation?
My sense is that this was incredibly close coordination between the Israelis and the Trump administration. The Trump administration shared a lot of intelligence and so forth, but the Israelis did a remarkable job, not just in Iran, but rolling up all the Iranian proxies that surrounded Israel.
They softened the battlefield.
Absolutely, and it's just unconscionable what the Biden administration had done with respect to Iran. They basically gave Iran hundreds of billions of dollars, and Iran used it as you would expect they would use it to build up these terrorist proxies. Trump cut that off, but they couldn't cut it off for long enough before Iran could have gotten a bomb.
Before we let you go, we're going to go a little long in this segment, but I wanted to ask you about this Jeffrey Epstein business. Alan Dershowitz penned an article, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, which is really interesting. As Epstein's lawyer, he laid out some things that were very, very interesting. He said he's seen the lists that are being discussed and that there actually wasn't a client list. He said he knows all this because he was representing Epstein. He says there is no client list. He said there are no cameras in bedrooms because the only cameras were outside the property because he'd had some burglary and theft stuff happen, including a firearm. He said there are no current politicians on that list of people dealing with Epstein. And he said that if he were a foreign agent, they would have used that to try to strike a better deal when Dershowitz was representing him early on. It kind of undercuts this idea that there's a there. What do you think?
It's an impressive column, and it does raise questions. I would add one to it. The Biden administration was in a position to embarrass people earlier and didn't release that information, and they surely would have done so if, as some people have said, well, Trump is not releasing it because Trump is on the list. Do you think that the Biden administration would have kept it secret if they could have released Trump's name on that list? No.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I think,
I've heard this.
Yeah. So I think that, but I think there's one other thing that your viewers should think about. There is so little trust in the government now that the fact that the government says something doesn't lead people to think, well, the government must know more than I do, and so what they're saying is true. Remember, 51 Intel agents, former Intel agents, said that the entire Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian hoax. They were just lying. And so I think that the undermining of trust in what the government tells us, which underlies a lot of the skepticism about the Epstein lists and so forth, is this larger story than just one surrounding Jeffrey.
General distrust of agencies.
Right.
Charles Lipson, I sure appreciate your time. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you, John.
Okay, we'll see you. Charles Lipson, and we're back in a moment on Newsmaker. Thanks as always for watching, and we will see you next week on Newsmaker.